to say there's no doubt about it, and I'm sure you would agree, the modern workplace has changed. In the last couple of years, I love that phrase I heard recently. That term unprecedented is almost redundant. How many things are unprecedented? Unprecedented change, unprecedented disruption, an unprecedented year. It's almost like, why don't we just say precedented? Because I think, we're getting so used to having to be flexible, having to adjust, having to change what we do, whether it's in work or in life. Put a yes in the chat box if you agree with me. I think that we'll just say things are precedented from now on. So in the midst of that, how do we, as business leaders, as business advisors, how do we support people through that process? And so, okay, so to get us into the zone, I found that the last 2 years, not only have we had to go through so many precedented changes, but we've also had a few laughs along the way. So to kick us off, I'm just going to share a little video just for a little bit of fun and lightheartedness. Maybe you can give a nod if you recommend. Just before I share that, I'll just make sure I share sound with you. So a little video to kick us off, a little bit of fun. Maybe you recognize one of these people.
Socioemocional de los niños, porque esa parte está quedando bien.
And if I just,
Oh my God, did he fall?
And it's really challenging, I know, with children home from school and working from home, but just trying to keep all of those distractions out of the
The whole page comes out.
No, don't touch the computer. I'm talking the whole metal part of the screen.
The monitor itself.
Don't use the mouse.
Okay. Now, wait a minute. It says mute, stop video.
No, I don't want you to do anything on the computer.
Share screen.
I don't want you to do anything on the computer.
In reality, I've heard that social work kind of has very high standards and like good standards of other professions don't have. Yeah.
Hold on.
what's up?
Tony, I can see you.
We can all see you.
I love that. Okay, so I wonder if any of you can relate, and hopefully none of you have had those moments in your own workplace. So a quick check-in with where you're at. I'm curious to know from your workplace. Question to you, how many days are your people working from home at the moment? So if you were to average for your organization, is it 2 days? Is it 3 days? Is it 1 day? Jump it into the chat. How many days approximately is your organization working from home? Curious to see. Yep, so Sarah, yeah, full time. That's right, Sarah. 2 to 3 days. Donna, Jason, across APAC, an average of 3. Amelia, 5 days a fortnight. I like that. 2 days from Georgina. Curious to know. 3 to 4, Jessica. Most days, 2 perhaps. That's interesting. So a lot of what we've put together in this report is we've looked at what is some of the global average around what is happening around the world. If you look at Stanford's study, which was before pandemic, so pre-pandemic, it was about 5% of the work week. So I don't even know what is, I'm not a mathematician, 5% of the work week. Is that even half a day? So I think that concept, that this idea of work from home was absolutely a idea and a philosophy, flexibility. Maybe it was more in your workplace, but it was an idea and an intention. And yet what happened during COVID, it became something that most of us have done. And so if you look at where we're at today, the average is about 50%, which is coming back on that study, 50% of the work week, so 2 to 3 days. Having a look at the PwC report, which we quoted a few times, 96% of Australian knowledge-based workers are either fully remote or hybrid. That's interesting. So the place of work has changed, but also the pace of work has changed. So another question for you, How many hours do you personally work now, post-pandemic, in an average work day? So if you were to think of your average hours, how many hours approximately? Jump on into the chat and let us know. So non-customer service roles most days from home. Thanks, Rosa. So how many hours do you work now, post-pandemic, from home? Curious to see. At least 8 hours. Interesting. 10 hours, Amelia, you're working too much. You're ready for cocktail hour. Too many. Yes, that's right, Gordon. 8 to 9 hours spread across 15. That's an interesting perspective. 8 to 9, 8. And what you're saying there is that when we look at knowledge workers, there was a piece of research done by Reclaim AI. And so before pandemic, and I know Amelia, you would have seen this, before pandemic, it was 7.5 hours. That was our average workday. And post the pandemic, it has gone up an average of 1.4 hours, is 8.9 hours is the average work per day. And not only has that pace of work changed, but also the number of meetings. And maybe you can relate, 69.7% increase in meetings. And so that's interesting. The rhythms of work have changed. And hasn't that been interesting, particularly if you lead teams with people in it? It's not only, I find it's not so much about do we trust people to do the work, it's actually that other aspect of how do we manage how people are working. Are they working these extended days? Are they actually not taking sick days anymore and working beyond, above and beyond, which potentially down the track has other flow-on issues and some impacts there. And what I found interesting through some of the research that we looked at, this PwC report, which I quote a couple of times, which was done earlier this year in April, they made this quote that says, the longer we have worked this way, the more and more we've embedded our everyday behaviors and expectations, and the less likely it seems that we'll ever return to our former full-time office reality. Isn't that a little bit mind-blowing? You think about this decades-long approach to work that we've got, and is it possible that it's no longer to hybrid or not to hybrid, it's this hybrid ever after work environment? And I'm curious to see, to you guys in the chat, what do you think in your workplace? Do you think that you will ever change? Do you think that you will ever go back to full time in the office? This is like looking at the crystal ball, but I'm curious to see. Any thoughts in the chat? Do you think we'll ever go back? So Gordon says no. Any other thoughts of people in the chat? No, from Jessica. It's fascinating to think about, isn't it? All of these buildings, facilities, these different ways of working, it's potentially changed forever. Prefer working in the office? Yes. That's our team is spread all over Australia, so I have to stay remote. And isn't that a factor? Looking at how teams, especially in a tight labour market, there's this geographical dispersed teams. So we have had to rethink the way we work. And looking at whether or not, so there's a whole bunch, as you look in the report, there's a whole bunch of asking the question, is it what people want? Is this the way that it is likely to stay from here on out? And the resounding conclusion to draw from the feedback, the data, is that yes. And it's because in many ways it's actually what people want. And just looking at this McCrindle research, which again I quote in the report, they actually look at 62% of the source that they looked at in 2021 said that they preferred a hybrid of work from home in the workplace, which is about 2/3 of the people that were sampled. And this is repeated again and again. So whether it's Boston Consulting Group, whether it's PwC, whether it's newspaper polls, whether it's McCrindle Research, which is one of Australia's leading research organisations, again and again from the sample that they looked at, particularly in knowledge workers. I know, like Rosa, in your workplace, sometimes you've got to be in the office, and there's other types of work where you do need to be in the office. For those knowledge workers that do have the choice, their choices is predominantly, I want to work hybrid. And having a look at that, and I guess particularly those of you in HR, you get it. You understand that this aspect of flexibility has now absolutely become a cornerstone in recruitment. particularly if you're in a tight labor market, like I know Plenty is in terms of finance, I know technology, recruitment, so many different industries right now are in these tight labor markets. And so flexibility has become one of those key differentiators. And so how is it that we can provide that? And a couple of the things which I've quoted again in the report is, you look at the extremes, because there's not one size fits all. So from Elon Musk's response, so if you remember back to his email back in April, as people were trying to figure this whole thing out, do people come back to work or will they work remotely? And if you look at, it was interesting to watch what some of the big companies would do. So Elon Musk was literally come back into, we don't want a pseudo workplace. If you don't come back, we'll assume you've resigned. So that was one end of the spectrum. But what I thought was interesting was looking at Google and Apple. Now, Google and Apple are people that you would think that they love their organization and would do anything to stay in their organization. And yet from Google, they were asked to come back. 2/3 of employees said they didn't want to and that they would look for other work if they didn't have the option. And Apple famously in April wrote their open letter from employees, which basically said, we want the choice to choose. And again, interesting to see from those of you online, is that your experience? Is that been a yes from your teams that there's choice? It's not so much about home or work. I want choice. So I'm curious to see for those of you online if that's the case. Yeah, choice is important. So, and I think that's the key piece, is around giving people choice, understanding what people want, and then understanding the needs of the business and making that flexibility. Yes, that's certainly been the, looks like it is a resounding yes, choice. So that's what brought us to this point. And again, I know Vanessa is so sad. She was so disappointed that she couldn't be here. So just to give you a little bit of context for those of you that don't know Vanessa. So the report which we're going to send to you, the reason why we created this is Vanessa is the founder of the Learning Circle Company. I know many of you know her. For those of you that don't, the Learning Circle Company is an HR boutique. In essence, it's a training company. And I do some corporate facilitation with the team. I was doing some work for them today. And they help leadership essentials, presentation, anything, building teams, the absolute leading training facility, and so helping so many people, and many of you would speak fondly of them. So my background is, background in corporate comms. The last 6 years I run my own business, and so as a keynote speaker and a facilitator, I became fascinated with the change. So it's interesting as we move to hybrid work. And what I was interested in is, as I started doing a number of interviews at the beginning of this year, and I went to supermarkets, I went to financial organizations, I went to government organizations, I went to telcos, media, so a broad range of organizations, and asked them, what are some of the challenges that you're having? There were some key themes that began to emerge, and what I found, and I wonder if you have this same experience, is no one really knows what is the right way to do. What we're basically doing is we're experimenting, we're looking at others, we're seeing what works, and we're making the most of what we've got, basically. And there are some that are well advanced, and I think there's some fundamental aspects that are working really well. And there are some aspects that could still apply some nuance, some capability, and some influence. And so working with Vanessa, I said, let's do a report on this to look at what are some of the challenges, and then what is the potential, what are some of the opportunities or the framework that we could put together to help people. And so that's what this report has been about. And I think, again, nicely summed up by an article. I realized I found so many articles by this guy called Chip Cutter from the Wall Street Journal. He writes a lot on it. And he says this: what makes hybrid work kind of interesting is it's the only kind of work we don't know how to do. People mastered working from home. In person is the way things are, but there are so many ways to get hybrid wrong. And I just found that fascinating. So I was like, okay, well, what can we glean from? What are the common themes? And what is it that we can help each other along the way with? But question to you guys, I'm interested to see, what have you found challenging? And even if you want to come off mic, if anyone wants to speak, I'm happy to, or feel free to jump into the chat. In your organization, what are some of the challenges that you have found? I'm curious to know. What are some of the challenges? What are you finding difficult? You know, and as I said, transitioning from this decades old way of doing things, is there any doubt that we've had challenges as we are literally in a precedented time? Remember, not unprecedented, precedented. Things are forever changing. So what are some of the challenges? Thank you, Gordon. A lack of personal interaction. The water cooler stops. Yes. Digital capability. Yes, absolutely. And especially in those early days when we had to transition to only online, only virtual tools. The difference in digital capability was absolutely a key feature. So what have we got? Sarah says training junior staff. Yep, absolutely. Jason, not having been able to meet direct reports in person for over 2 years. Jason, you are not alone. And that, I think, is such a fascinating construct, that we might join a team and everything would be online, and some people haven't even met. And you know, you have that moment where you walk in, you're like, oh my gosh, you're so much taller than I thought. There was another person that I realized I was doing these Zoom calls with, and she said, I'm actually going on maternity leave tomorrow. I'm like, what do you mean? What do you mean? Are you pregnant? And then she stood up and I was like, oh wow, okay. So it's amazing what we can have this experience almost entirely online. Yes, so onboarding new joiners. Yes, Mel. Amelia, employee onboarding experience. Yes, Amelia. Ondina, work with business, find people have lost connection. Even on Zoom, they leave their cameras off and don't engage. Zoom is the ultimate leveler. You're right. In some ways, it has democratized work, and other times it presents challenges. You know, how when you're in, so this is a bit of a different setup we've got here. This is like a studio setup. So I've got a bit more movement. You can see a bit more of what's going on. But as you say, when you're in, when you've only got the box, and this is how much you've got to communicate all the non-verbals, it can absolutely be quite challenging. And Rosa, yes, not getting enough breaks from the monitors. Meetings and work inflow is continuous. Yeah, which goes back to that pace and place of work. The pace has changed. And so in some ways, as I said, for leaders, the challenge is, how do we actually help people take breaks? How do we create new rhythms to facilitate? Yes, Donna, 30-minute Zoom for a 5-minute conversation, back-to-back Zooms. Yeah. If you're on the screen or on chat, give me a wave if that's been an experience. There's just this constant Zoom to Zoom to Zoom to Zoom to Zoom. And Adam Grant, there's a quote in here, let me not misquote him. He says it's like looking at a room full of mirrors, and we actually get so incredibly tired because we're staring back. We're actually tuned into, I can't find where the quote is, but you can read it yourself. So it's like looking at a wall full of mirrors. And when you're looking at a mirror, we're actually looking at the micro movements, not only of yourself, which is what he talks about, but also of others. We're constantly studying these micro movements, which is part of where that Zoom drain comes from. It is exhausting, isn't it? Yes. So what we looked at from our interviews, observations, and I must say, as I started to collect the information, I hit this point of overwhelm, like, oh my gosh, there is so much. And where do you start? Like, what do you look at the organizational side? Do you look at it from the leaders? Do you look at the team? Do you work on culture? Like, what are the different aspects that you can look at? And so as I looked at it, there was 4, I did my best. I probably amalgamated a few, let's be honest, 4 key challenges that emerged as we drew on some of the research and insights. So let me take you through a few of what I'll do now is take you through some of the challenges to give you an insight. I will touch on what the framework was. So how do we make meaning of that? And then I will send you the report so you can read through the rest of it. So let me talk a little bit about some of the key ideas and the challenges. So the first one was this idea of coordination, and in particular, this idea of tackling the traditional team bias. So, okay, think about this. You're walking into your team meeting. So particularly for, is it Georgina, you're in the office? So you're walking into your team meeting. So it's probably a boardroom style. You're starting to file in, got your coffee or your waters. Hey, how you going? So you walk into the meeting, you sit down, you look up at the screen and you can see, oh, there's two people dialing and you can see their faces already getting ready. You can actually already see, actually I should go down here for this. You can already see the screen which has got the room in it. And it's the camera angle is so high, so you're actually like looking down on people's heads. So it's almost like this. So you're looking down on people's heads. And what actually happens is the team leader walks in and they sit at the back of the room. So the people in the room, they turn to the team meeting, to the team leader, and they start having conversation. And the conversation's really fast and furious, and they're talking to each other, and they are having this amazing conversation. And how do you feel when you're sitting there online looking in? You feel left out, don't you? Because not only are you looking at people's backs, but you're also looking at people's heads. So this whole experience, and what's happened here? This is where we fall back into the traditional team bias, which is where we act, we lead, we behave as if everyone is in the office. The challenge is, when we're in this remote working environment, is it's not only the people in the office, it's also about how do we facilitate and coordinate all experiences so that it bears in mind the people who are also online. So what do we do? And there's a few tips, and I wonder, maybe you could put a yes into the chat if you can relate with this or you've seen this. It's not only about things like camera angles. So, there's some really simple things that you can do in your meeting room to incorporate people. It's like putting it at eye level, so you actually look like you're looking people. Putting the person who's going to speak closer to the camera. So when you're looking, you're actually looking this way as opposed to this experience. It's also thinking about things like how do you plan for the person who's remote? Putting some team meeting guidelines together to make sure you're thinking of that person, to think about time zone and tech capabilities, some of the things that you already said. It's also about things like, as it says, coordination. Now, the quote, which is here, says, and it came from the Society for Human Resource Management, and it says 42% of supervisors say they sometimes forget to assign tasks to remote workers, which is interesting. So how do we not only think about the people who aren't in the room, particularly if you've got more people in the office than not, and it also comes through as we're thinking about career progression, thinking about creating opportunities to connect with people outside of the team, giving visibility to people who are in remote areas so that they can think about those career possibilities, because that was a big one that came through, those career opportunities. If I don't have visibility, if I'm not seen by people, will I be forgotten? And some of the data says quite possibly. So that is absolutely something that we need to keep top of mind. Yes, we have the person dialing in to host a meeting works for team meetings. Yes, so thinking about how. So that's just one challenge. Another challenge is, and this was, for whoever said it was the first comment that came through, it was connection. So social connection. And it's beautifully summed up in the writer from the Wall Street Journal who said, Joanna Stern, she was talking about it's hard to build trust when there's no water cooler, no nearby coffee shop for informal brainstorm, no place to grab drinks after work. So what do we do? And I heard it time and time again. You think about it, when you're walking between meetings, you're having that idle chit chat. When you're heading off to grab a coffee, you're having these idle chit chat. There's also a whole bunch of data that talks about even when you're in a meeting and you're having a collaborative session and you're in the room with someone, then you walk out and you see them in the kitchen, that recognition can help actually prompt more ideas, and it continues to flow on. So there's something magical that happens about that connection, that sense of affinity, the time where you build rapport, where you go deeper in relationships. And when you create that connection, that social connection, and there's a study I quote in the report that actually, the significance of small talk. It helps people click, it helps people stay, it also helps people be more productive and actually contributes to well-being. And I think there's an interesting quote which was by the HR professional Brian Kropp from Gartner. He said, this eroding of a sense of connection with colleagues means it's easier to resign from a job. After all, many people stay in roles because the people they work with and one of those social and emotional bonds are weakened, work can become transactional. And how's this quote? It's easier to quit because you're not quitting your friends. It has a significant impact, and I would say, and I'd be curious if anyone has solved for this, I would say this area is probably the number one area that is people long for and that many organizations don't know how to solve. And it's because it's actually really hard to solve. So when we get to the point of talking about the framework, I think there's big things and there's small things. So the big things are definitely technology, and there's a whole bunch of work going on looking at gaming. It's fascinating when you look at gaming and you see virtual gaming. You're sitting there practicing your virtual golf swing, but what happens? You're having that incidental chat. And so I think as VR and AR progresses, and I quote, Microsoft and Facebook are definitely working on that. I think that will be interesting to see how, as we move into that space, and it's not these big dorky goggles, I think as they refine that technology and make that more affordable, I reckon we're going to see huge changes and advances in this space. In the meantime, there's a whole bunch of small things that you can do. And really, this was just a collection of conversations from different strategies, different tactics that people are doing, as we put a whole bunch of suggestions in there, which you can definitely follow up on. So as we go through this, I'm interested to see which one of these do you think really is resonant in your area? So coordination, connection, I wonder which might be relevant for you. The third one I heard a lot of was this idea of culture. So I've written up here cultural osmosis because it's fascinating to think that what's happened is this disconnect from the cultural osmosis. We've been separated from the place where we experience culture. And then if that's the case, does culture exist? You think about it, what is culture? Culture is a pattern of observable behaviors. And if you can't observe the behaviors, does it exist? Well, yes, is the answer, of course. And yet, does it need to be redefined? Do we need to think about how we define culture and how we communicate it? That's what I've been interested in. So what happens when you can't observe it? Does it exist? And there's some interesting observations around culture. It's funny when you say culture so many times, it sounds funny, culture, and how that has played out. So that one will be interesting for you to have a look at. Chief People Officer from Salesforce said the number one danger to Salesforce and other companies is that people are going to become disengaged in the culture of the company. And I think where this plays into, particularly when you think about recruitment, we think about employee value proposition, thinking about how people feel about an organization. When you're working from home and what you see out the window is some hens, some kids walking past, or maybe, the TV, this is your home, your space. How does the distinctiveness of the brand of a company immerse into those spaces? And I think that is a challenge that many people are working through. So final one, I hope you're still with me here. The final one that I see and define it again, we see pulling into is this idea of, again, going through alliteration, got the C's, is capabilities. So someone said it before, one of the challenges is that tech capabilities, and particularly I think when you think about your leaders, the quote that I heard which I just loved, was that when I said, what are some of the challenges you're having? And this particular senior executive in a state government organization said, some people are better than others. Not all leaders are natural born leaders. Not all leaders are natural born communicators. I love that, natural born. This innate sense of leadership, this innate sense of capability. And of course, it's been, as someone said before, the great leveler. Now we're in precedented times. Things are changing, things are flexible, things are adjusting all the time. We don't know. And also, as things change, hello, budgets change as well. We actually want you to do more with less. And you also have to manage your team and you can't see them anymore. You have to be able to tap into things like well-being, motivation, to work with poor performers, even though you're only looking at through the Zoom screen. There's a lot of challenges. And so it makes sense then that the capabilities that our leaders have need to be refreshed. What are some of the gaps? What are some of the areas that they need to work on? Is it around communication? Is it around some of having those difficult conversations? Is it around building team and team dynamics? What is it in your area, I wonder? So I've given you the 4 C's. So they were coordination, communication, cultural osmosis, and capabilities. I'm curious, have I missed something? Is there something that stands out for you? And which one of those do you think for your organization is probably true? It feels like it's resounding, it makes sense. So jump on into the chat. Which one stands out for you? So Sarah says definitely connection. Interested to know, maybe none of them. Maybe you've got something else. Maybe you guys are totally humming. I'm curious to see from your point of view in your organization, which one of those stands out? Which one do you identify with? Interested to see. So connection, I'm sure some of those ones are typing. Connection, cultural osmosis, yes. And that, I would say, they're probably the 2 that seem the most ambiguous, and that people are still working through. Interested to see some of the feedback coming through. Connection, yes, Mel, I agree. That's certainly one that I have heard as well. So as a few of you are typing through your answers, yes, Amelia, strengthen connections in a hybrid environment, yes. Actually, I met Amelia at a session a few weeks ago, and one of the challenges that her colleague told me is almost employees holding the workplace to ransom because they are demanding flexibility. And I thought, wow, isn't that interesting to see how we're providing those different arrangements. So connection and capabilities from Lee, building psychological safety in a hybrid environment. Absolutely, Jason. I think absolutely. How do we create that sense where everyone can contribute, where you feel safe, where you won't feel judged, so that can contribute to safety, to innovation, and to opportunity. So I would agree with that. Thank you. So as we look at, well, now that we have the challenges, how do we make meaning of that? How do we, and I keep coming up with this phrase, how do you lead and team? So that's probably a bit of funny language, but really, how do we lead people and how do we create effective, powerful connections within team in this hybrid environment, particularly if we're in this potential hybrid ever after space? Now, if you'll indulge me, speakers and thought leaders, we love a metaphor. So if you indulge me, I think it's a little bit like an electrical circuit. So I wonder if you or your kids have played with one of these. What is an electrical circuit? You'll have maybe a battery source, you'll have a light, you've got these connecting wires, and as they go together, when the whole system works, it works. When everything is connected well, the switch is on, then the system will work. I've got a 10-year-old daughter. She just turned 10 on Sunday. Her name's Harper, and a 6-year-old little boy. And you can imagine in our household when my 10-year-old daughter gets something, she loves it, she wants to play with it, and my 6-year-old son wants to break it, destroy it, mess it up, become the center of attention as he destroys her games. And so she got one of these electrical circuits. She's playing with it. She's connected it together. She's made this quite big network, getting the light. And there's also a fan. I don't know if you've seen those ones where it pops up and the little fan goes up into the air. And of course, Bailey comes running through, smashes it, has to break it. And the whole thing doesn't work because it's not connected. And I think if you will, again, indulge me with the metaphor, it's sort of what's happened in the last few years. We've had this system that has been in place, that's been working for decades. You know, sure, there's been iterative changes. It's probably got a lot more fancy and high tech over the years. At the same time, this system, it works. And it was unprecedented. March 2020, when things changed, forever, our systems were transformed. Some stopped working. Some of them, the lights went out. For many of you, and I know, you quickly adjusted and you moved on. But let's be honest, in some places it might be held together with a piece of tape. Other ones are working beautifully. And so if I look at the system of where I think things are today, I think that, of course, there's technology. I think there's also processes and workflow and skills and capabilities. And from our observation, these three things are actually well in place. I think systems are working, technology is mostly there and support this kind of working, and processes and workflow are in place. HR policies, HR has been absolutely fundamental through so much of these changes. Understanding complex policy and making it relevant for businesses. I think, understanding flexibility, what it means, those aspects have been, I would say, very mature in Australian businesses. Where we meet that ambiguity is things like social connection and things like culture. But if we look at, again, where's the gap? So where's the gap in the system? And as I said, how do you solve this? And I think it's not about how do we solve this, how do we help this be even more effective? What is the pressure point that we can press into to have a positive impact? And I believe that piece is the leader, your leaders, your people. So if we're going to create a positive impact for your business, for your people, for the culture, for connections, and to make all the rest of it work, if you put emphasis on the leader, then it's going to help the overall system. And this is where it leads into the final section of the report, which is just starting to set out some things that you can focus on from that leadership perspective. Now, if you will, again, it's about 7,000 words, so it's not an exhaustive list. If anything, it's a bit like a tasting plate. You might find for your business, just picking off a piece of it is actually what's going to be helpful. And of course, it's just sort of the tip of the iceberg. And of course, where the richness is in through programs and doing that deeper work. But looking at what those pieces are, the first one was, how do we rethink? And I'm just going to do this quickly because we've only got a couple of minutes left. So I'm only going to talk about these and give you the chance to read it afterwards. So the first one is, how do you rethink the rhythms of work? How do we think about our daily diary? How do we think about the ways that we interact with the team from that leadership perspective? Rethink the rhythms of work. The second one is, how do we redesign team engagement? And I know a lot of you are doing this well. How do you incorporate physical workplace? How do you think through team engagement? And I was drawn to thinking about this idea of storming, norming, forming, performing, and actually applying that context in the hybrid space. So how do we rethink? The third one is, how do we reimagine connection and communication? And there's a whole keynote topic on this one idea. How do you reimagine connection and communication? Because this is the thing that is vastly different. What is the new way, the additional way, the different way that we reimagine this space. And there's a few ideas, big things and small things. And the final one is about how do we refresh leadership essentials. Because we don't, in this place more than ever, we're not throwing out those aspects like what Jason said before around psychological safety, around things like having crucial conversations, around things like how to inspire and motivate your team. All of these things are just as essential as ever. Where they need the refresh is in the current environment. So how do we tap into that? So that's the final piece, and I look forward to sharing the report with you as a result after this meeting. So look out for the email, which will give you the update. So it's called Leading in Hybrid, Equipping Leaders for the New Rhythms of Work. And I think more than anything, I think here we are standing on the threshold of, I think, what is an exciting transformation of the way that we work. I think the opportunity is, how do we do this well? What are the aspects? Maybe you've identified with some of the challenges and thought, yeah, I'm interested. What are the different ways that I can lean into that to maybe refresh, maybe to reimagine, maybe to even rethink some of the rhythms of work? So I'd be curious to hear from your perspective what that would look like. And of course, as you know, with some of you already work with Vanessa and the work that I do as well, there's different ways that we help. It could even look like you've got a leadership offsite or a kickoff meeting next year, and this is a hot topic that we want to empower your leaders with, and you're like, this as a keynote, you're thinking, how can we inspire leaders? Maybe it's a half-day workshop. Maybe that's something where we actually facilitate it with your business and what you need, or it's around tapping into a broader training program which goes deeper. That's how we can help. If it's not through those aspects, I hope that we can help you by just simply sharing this information with you. And maybe there's a few ideas from the tasting plate that come out and to stand out and to assist you in your business. And so that's the part where I wrap up. I thank you for being here for the next 45 minutes, and I love to deliver on what I say I will and give you that time back in the day. But I'm still here. If you want to ask any questions, I'm absolutely happy to answer any of those. The next steps from here is that we will send you the report. Make sure you get that. Feel free to share it on with anyone that is helpful, and we'll follow up with you to see if there's any questions or any way that we can help. So if you've got any questions, I'm here. I'd love to answer them. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining today. I hope you have a wonderful day. Oh, well, do I say wonderful day tomorrow on public holiday, morning the Queen? I hope it's a good day, whatever it is, however you enjoy tomorrow. And Vanessa and I are grateful that you could join us, and we look forward to connecting with you soon. Thanks, everyone. See you later.